Hello, it's your girl Ari, also known as Nadia Sabe, and I am super excited to be back at Inner Space Orlando for another episode of the Run It Back podcast. If you don't know, it's a music industry news podcast, and today it's going to be pretty quick. We only have a couple of stories, so I'm just going to get straight into it. The first thing that we're going to talk about is Chappell Roan and the speech that she gave at the Grammys when she was accepting her award for Best New Artist, okay? So I'm going to go through the statement really quickly. She says, "Thank you to all who listened to get me here today, and Dan and Island Records, Amusement Records, my friends and family, and above all, my Papa Chappell, who I named myself after." And this is where she gets into it. She says, "I told myself if I ever won a Grammy and I got to stand up here in front of the most powerful people in music, I would demand that labels and the industry profiting millions of dollars off of artists would offer a livable wage and health care, especially for developing artists." She said this while she was reading out of a notebook. She said, "I got signed young, and when I was dropped, I had zero job experience under my belt. And like most people, I had a difficult time finding a job in the pandemic and could not afford health insurance. It was so devastating to feel so committed to my art and feel so betrayed by the system, and feel so dehumanized to not have any health care. If my label would have prioritized artist health, I could have been provided care by a company I was giving everything to." Now, this in itself, like when it was initially said, was not like a super controversial thing. Like, at least from my perspective, all of the commentary that I saw about it was good. And then we have this man who did a piece on the Hollywood Reporter, what is the word that I'm trying to say? What is going on with the Wi-Fi? He did like a guest piece on the Hollywood Reporter and had a lot of begrudging things to say about Chappell Roan's statement. Honestly, the whole thing felt very like mansplaining, super misogynistic, and the guy honestly just like sounds like an asshole based off of this article. And this caused a lot of commotion because, you know, this was a really big statement for her to make on, of course, such a grand scheme. And so this response to it was really interesting. It's a very long article, so I'm not going to read through all of it, but I want to get to like some of these points where you can just see kind of like how he's saying what he's saying. And some of the things that he talks about, like he basically is saying that like she needs to put her money where her mouth is, and that she needs to, because she is now like a Grammy Award winning artist, she is like a part of the problem, and like she has to, it's just, the whole thing is really weird. And this is where he talks about it. He says the outsider becomes the establishment. Chappell Roan, born Kaylee Rose, isn't the first artist to frame themselves as an outsider railing against the system, but the moment she stepped onto the Grammy stage on Sunday night, she was no longer the scrappy indie artist fighting from the fringes. She became a part of the establishment. It is disingenuous to cash a fat label check. Disingenuous to cash a fat label check, ride meaningful industry support to mainstream success, and then act like a kid who didn't get picked for a dodgeball when your name is called. Like, I don't know if you can tell, the tone of how he's writing this just seems very, like, condescending. Like, I'll break the news too. I'll break the news. You are no longer a revolutionary fighting the power, the oldest music cliche in history, but you are positioned to do great things for artists and writers nonetheless. See, there's still room for puppy dogs and ice cream in this story. Like, I don't know, it just sounds like I said, really condescending, and it just is giving, like, when I need to get to the specific part where he talks about how Chappell Roan, basically he says that like Chappell Roan is green. He says that those words, that she's green and uninformed. Here we go. Green and too uninformed to be the agent of change she aspires to be today. And then one of the other things that he says, if labels are responsible for artists' wages, healthcare, and overall well-being, where does it end And where does personal responsibility begin? Like, there were some points where I was he was making some points. That is a valid, thing to say. But what it was that really bothered me was when he basically said that she, doesn't understand how the industry works. She doesn't understand how deals work. And to me, it was just this is someone, first of all, I feel like the whole context of it was just fucked up, because Chappell Roan was trying to have a conversation about the industry at large. And when you think about the anecdote that she brought, she talked about when she was a young artist who was dropped and the effect that had on her. So him trying to position this as oh, Chappell Roan is screaming woe is me, and she doesn't understand what she's talking about, and she can't, give any commentary to the situation because she is now a Grammy Award-winning artist, is just weird and gross, because it was very clear that Chappell Roan was talking about the huge sector of musicians who are oftentimes shelved or dropped, because that's just kind of how the industry works. Not everyone gets to make it, as you could say. There's a lot of musicians who go on to get deals and who come out of those deals, you could even say, worse off than they were before they got signed, if you understand what I'm saying. And what Chappell Roan was calling to is a change in the culture, in the way that these businesses operate. Now, Chappell Roan, the solutions that she gave were livable wages and healthcare. Now, that may not be the across-the-board solution to what is going to bridge the gap between creatives and artists and the labels that they work with. But it definitely, of course, we're talking about it now, continues the conversation of what is the solution, because clearly we need things to change in the way that labels compensate musicians. That is the conversation that needs to be had. That is, why Chappell made the statement in the first place. Not so that she could be the sole savior of the music industry and be the one who, she makes the statement and everything happens automatically. That was not Chappell's goal with this, and I think that that's pretty clear. And this guy's article was just really weird and gross and mean, and he basically told her, he was you need to put some money into this. So you know what Chappell did? Chappell said, all right, bet, I'll throw some money at this. And she donated $25,000 towards essentially healthcare and mental health, specifically for developing musicians. Excuse me. Now, there were some other people who also matched these donations. She was boy, you need to match this donation because you talking all that shit. Mind you, this is the man who wrote that article is also an ex-executive, so it just kind of shows you where he's really coming from. And she said, I'm not changing my mind on the way that I feel about this, despite, this backlash that she was getting from this guy and from some people who agreed with him, She goes, random dudes are allowed to criticize my Grammy speech, but they best put their money where their mouth is. Otherwise, move out the way. And his response, this is where it's just crazy. He said, the guy who wrote the article, that Chappell Roan should stop dumpster diving by criticizing his criticism and instead act like the agent of change that you say you want to be, which she already put the money up. So if that's what you're saying, acting like an agent of change is, because that's not the only way that you enact change. Putting money towards something is the only way that you do something. But once again, the critique was on the industry at large. So how are you going to tell this artist who's critiquing the industry that she needs to do X, Y, Z and do this to change the industry when she's critiquing these institutions? You see what I'm saying? That's the point of what I'm getting at, is that Chappell was talking about the institution of the music industry, and this guy took it upon himself to personally attack this young woman, tell her that she's too green in the industry because she wanted the Best New Artist award, even though she was signed 10 years ago. And that's what her anecdote was about, the fact that she was signed so young, and that how that set her up as, the trajectory coming out of that was not good for her. And that was her anecdote about it. And yes, now she came out of it, but the bitch has skin in the game. It's, it takes 10 years to have an overnight success. And I just think it's really funny and really telling that, here we are still having to deal with grown men just not getting the plot, not understanding the plot, and then seeing young women who do understand the plot and who are trying to, like, change the plot because we see that we don't like the plot, telling them that they don't know what they're talking about, they're too naive, and they essentially telling them how to be revolutionary while being on the side of the oppressor. You see what I'm saying? So, lots of interesting things. I'm very happy that Chappell Roan made that statement. I'm happy for her for sticking to her guns. And I'm excited to continue the conversation about how labels should be compensating musicians. Boom. There we go. Next thing that we're going to talk about, Kendrick halftime show. I'm not going to get into all of the symbology that went on during this because it's a lot to talk about. And the funny thing is, excuse me, I really don't feel like I have seen any good, like, written analysis about the halftime show. The best analyses that I've personally seen have been, like, all on TikTok and stuff like that. But I did link something specifically because of the slideshow that they put in here. Because I don't even think that their interpretations are really all correct. But, it shows pictures of all the things that that have things to be said about, basically. Now, I'm not going to get into all of that because that could be a whole video in itself, talking about the symbology of this halftime show. But at the end of the day, it is a somewhat controversial topic, primarily because there are certain people of a certain demographic who vote a certain way who are saying that this was the worst halftime show of all time, which I personally, of course, really do not agree with. I, as a viewer, heavily enjoyed it for a multitude of reasons. We know that for Kendrick, this was like a multi-purposed show, right? This was the cherry on top of the beef, right? Proving that he's big as the Super Bowl, calling him a pedophile in front of 60 million or 600 million. I don't know. A big amount of millions of people. The video that the NFL has now itself has like 67 million views on it. Then we also have the fact that, this was a social commentary, regardless of if you understood it or not. There was a lot of things within this performance that were there to speak to the people, to speak to institutions, and to disrupt, right? And that's a point that I'm going to get at later. And then the third thing, of course, is to just promote the fact that he's going on tour with SZA, and if you want to see more of this, we can make it happen. One of the things that I thought was a funny thing that people were talking about with this performance was that SZA was lip syncing. Now, I think that was the best choice to be made because if I wouldn't have wanted to hear her live. And that's just to say of how volatile her live performances could be, especially with the dancing that she was doing, the moves that she was hitting. It was the right decision to make that bitch lip sync, you know what I'm saying? And like I said, I'm not going to go through all of the symbology of like how this was a social commentary and who to what now. But what I will say is that because of the response that it's getting, you can, that within itself shows you that it has revolutionary substance to it. And the reason that I say that is because when you disturb institutions, you disturb status quo, and you disturb people within institutions with your art, that is revolutionary, and that is why I would deem the performance within itself a revolutionary thing, regardless of how much, money is going to be made from that, and the capitalist this, yeah, all that. Even though I'm like queen of the anti-capitalist brigade. But like I said, due to the disturbance that it caused, that's why I view it the way that I view it. With that being said, I want to give a huge shout out to my boy Anthony and the Links blog because he put out a phenomenal write-up about the halftime show that really made me think about the fact that I just called it, revolutionary. And if you read it, I really want you guys to read it. You'll understand what I'm saying. So please go check out Anthony in the Links blog. He has a bunch of really just amazing content up on his blog. So if you are just a music fan, hip hop head, and you're interested in learning about things like that, go to the Links blog. Shout out to Anthony, and specifically go read his write-up on the Super Bowl halftime. All right. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm like going through something right now. So the final thing that we're going to talk about is the most tedious thing that we're going to talk about today, but also probably the most important thing that we're going to talk about today, because it's like the thing that has to actually do with like your money and laws and shit like that. So what we're going to talk about is the American Music Fairness Act. If my Wi-Fi will ever get its shit together, you know what I'm saying? Then we could finally fucking talk about the last story. We can move on with today. But right now, my computer, it just don't want to do that. So we're going to give it a couple seconds. I'm going to keep stalling by having this conversation with you guys. And we're going to try and get into it. There we go. All right. So what is the American Music Fairness Act? What it is a bill that was introduced by Darnell Issa and Congressman Jeffrey Nadler. Let me get this a little bit bigger. To ensure that artists and music creators are paid when their songs are played on FM, AM radio. So let's break this down. Wait, what? What you mean by AM, FM don't pay royalties out to musicians? They do. But how it works is that they pay on the publishing side of your record. So we've talked about this before. You have 200 points. You have publishing. You have masters. AM, FM, aka terrestrial radio, only pay performance royalties to publishers. Okay? The reason why this is a thing and why the American Music Fairness Act is coming into play is because the industry at large, right? You have performers. Those performers usually don't own a lot of their publishing because they have a lot of songwriters who create the music for them that they then sing over. And then, so they're being paid out through their masters, but then usually they don't own a lot of their masters depending on their deal, right? So what do artists even really own? But the point of this is that AM, FM / terrestrial radio only pays performance royalties on the publishing side of things, right? They only give money to your PRO or your publishing house, performance rights or performance royalties on the publishing side, right? What the American Music Fairness Act will do is make it so that they also have to pay digital performance royalties that are paid out through Sound Exchange. These are royalties that are already paid by iHeart, Pandora, these not on demand, but what am I trying to say? I can't think of the right word right now. But basically internet radio and like radio that you don't have direct, control over. You can download the app, whatever. Blah, 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 blah. These applications and companies are already paying digital performance royalties that go to that master side of the record, right? That will go to the performers. So what the American Music Fairness Act would do is make it so that terrestrial radio has to pay both of those royalties. So on top of the money that they're already giving you to your performance for your performance royalties, they also want for them to pay a digital performance royalty. This is great for anyone who owns 100% of their music because it just means more money for you. And then of course for artists who are signed to labels and who don't own a lot of their publishing, or who have a lot of, that's really just the way to put it, who don't own a lot of their publishing or who don't see that money, this is going to be good for them because it's going to give them something to see when their music is played on radio, which they do deserve something from that. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, this was a super quick episode, and I'm super happy to say that because today has just been a lot, y'all. There's been so many technical difficulties, and your girl is just like over it. I'm not even gonna lie. I'm so ready to get off this podcast and start editing for you beautiful people. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed. I hope that this was insightful for you. Like I said, it was super quick, but we're trying to keep it consistent again with these podcast episodes. So even if there isn't like a bunch of stuff for me to talk about, we definitely want to make sure that we're still getting here and talking to you and giving you the information that we can. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, thank you so much for watching, listening, seeing me, you know, all that good stuff. Once again, as per usual, we're at Inner Space Orlando, where all of your amazing audio-visual desires can be fulfilled. And it's your girl, Ari. Have a good day. Adios.